Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining the session today. This is a little bit different on the idea of finances and budget and money and all of these things. We're coming into the new year, and one of the most common beginning of the year goals is I want to get my money under control. I want to get my money doing what I want it to do. And that could be, depending on the stage of life you're in, that could look different ways for different folks. That could be about, spending less. That could be about making more. That could be about a lot of different things. And so this session is kind of a foundational idea of what do you do that helps you actually stick to that idea. So this isn't the mechanics of how to do a budget or the mechanics of how to use cash envelopes or any of these other tools and techniques that you can do to get your money in order. Instead, this is focused more on the mindset and the belief system and kind of connecting ourselves to the reason why maybe that goal of getting your money in order is something that you want to do in this new year. And so we'll start talking a little bit about that. So why do we do the why? Well, as a coach, one of the things that I teach is we kind of go through three phases when it comes to talking about our coaching. When I'm working with someone on their money, when I'm working with someone on their time, it really doesn't matter because they're both finite resources. And the first stage is to refocus and really figure out what's important to you. What are your priorities? What are your values? Why is this goal something you want to do? And then the second is to begin to gain control. And that's where we can inject tools and techniques and different strategies and all of that sort of thing. And then at the end, we begin to set a plan that allows that to continue and sustain. And often at the end of that, as you begin to execute on that plan, you have to go back to the refocus stage because things change. As you move through life, you get to a new phase in life. If you think about it, when we begin life, when we're kind of in the launch phase, we've got certain goals. And then we usually go through a phase where it's kind of acquisition. We begin to acquire a house, acquire a spouse, acquire other things. And then we kind of begin to move through into, kind of more maturity and higher earning phases. And then there's pre-retirement and retirement. Depending on where you find yourself in that journey, your reasons are going to be different. What you're focusing on is going to be different. And so that's why this is more something that you can do regardless of what phase of life you're at to begin to identify and connect yourself with the reason behind what we're doing. So let me tell you a little story. We've had a client in the past that was really interested in getting their money in order, but they'd done all of the stuff that everyone says they're supposed to do. They'd done a budget, they worked with cash envelopes, they tried this program and that program, they'd gone to this workshop, they'd watched these videos, they'd done everything that they reasonably could do. They'd read the books and nothing seemed to stick. And then what happened is, as we were working through coaching, we began to try to figure out, well, what is your real priority? What's really important to them? And what ended up coming out of that is they had had a child, and that's a big one for a lot of people. A lot of times having a kid kind of changes your mindset. But in this case, they'd still been going along, overspending, they'd been writing hot checks, and they began to implement some techniques, and things began to kind of settle down a little bit and get a little better. They weren't really succeeding yet, but they'd improved because they'd had the accountability of coaching and they'd begun to inject some tools and some discipline and these sorts of things, but they really hadn't stuck yet. Then all of a sudden, as we began to work through these exercises, one thing kind of bubbled out. See, it turned out that their child was special needs. And they looked around one day and they realized that no one in their family was really good with money either. That everyone in their immediate circle was living just like they were. And that if something happened to them, their child would not be able to be taken care of. Their child would be left probably as a ward of the state. And they realized they didn't want that to happen. And so as they became connected to that emotion, now all of a sudden they began to recognize and move forward and make changes, and things really took off. And inside of a year, they'd gotten control of their money. They'd stopped overdrawing on their accounts. They got a little emergency fund in place. They began to pay down debt. And within a couple of years, everything had turned around. They were completely debt-free. They had several, thousands of dollars in their bank. They had an estate plan set up where things would be taken care of. They had insurances in place. Everything was right. And it wasn't magic. It wasn't that they didn't know what to do ahead of time. It's because they got connected to their real drive, their real reason why. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. What is your why? What do you want to get connected to? Why would you want to make a change in your money? And how would that look? And so first, we're going to do a little exercise. And again, if you haven't already, if you go to the inspiredstewardship.com/momentum, there is a downloadable there that you can download that will have 2 different tools. We're not going to use those yet, but you'll need them here in a couple of minutes. So if you haven't had a chance to go there and download those yet, you can do that before we get to that here in a moment. And so let's see. So let's do this first. We're going to answer 3 questions. And I actually want you to do this. If you're comfortable, go ahead and put your answer in chat. If you want to, just jot it down yourself or write it on a piece of paper. That's fine too. But you are welcome to put those things into whatever way you want to hold on to it. Again, if you want to share it with other people, I would encourage you to do that. If you're working with a spouse or someone else, do this separately. Even if there's 2 of you watching right now, don't do it together. Do this separately. And if your spouse isn't watching and you're in a relationship or working with a significant other, write these questions down too and have them do it later, and then compare your answers. It can lead to some pretty interesting conversations. So here's the first question. What does wealth mean to you? There isn't really a right answer or wrong answer here. What does wealth mean to you? And again, you're welcome to put it in chat if you would like to share it, and you're welcome to just keep it to yourself if you'd like to do that as well. But what does wealth mean to you? I'll give you a moment to answer. Good. I'm seeing a lot of good answers come in. And again, it's what it means to you. So even if you see somebody else put something and it's the same as what you're thinking, or if it's different, doesn't matter, because this is really a personal decision. Okay. If you put a 1-word answer like safety or time or freedom, I would encourage you. You don't have to do it in chat if you don't have time, but go into more than that. So if somebody says freedom to me, my first question is, great, what does freedom mean to you? Just take that word and place it into the same question, because the truth is, right, when somebody says freedom, 3 of us could say the word freedom and mean 3 totally different things. So think about what it means to you. What does that word mean? If you say peace of mind, like I see there, what does peace of mind mean to you? Try to dig as deep as you can beyond just the word. Now I see somebody writing a few more words. Because the truth is, when you think about, what does it mean? It's probably multidimensional, right? There's probably different components. It's not just one thing. And you'll also notice that almost all the words that people are listing in chat are emotional words. This isn't about math. This is about feelings. This is about how do we feel. And the truth is, our money is connected to that. So here's the next question. If you could only have or do or achieve, however you want to phrase it, one thing, if there was only one thing and that was the only thing you could focus your time, your energy, and your money on, what would that one thing be? What is the single most important thing? If you could only do one thing, if I forced you to do that one thing and that one thing only, what would be that one thing? And again, you're welcome to keep this to yourself. You're welcome to put it in chat and share it with others as well. I'm seeing such great answers to what does wealth mean to you as well. That's fantastic. Buy a house, pay for son's college, freedom to create desired lifestyle, make a difference in people, make a difference in family and friends. There isn't a right or wrong answer. So if live life to your fullest is what your answer is, it is the perfect answer and it counts absolutely. But I would then ask you, what does live life at the fullest mean? What does it look like to you? Paint a picture of it. This, by the way, is a really good, if you're a visual person, once you've done these questions, this is something that you can turn into like a vision board for the year where you take images of what this looks like and create a collage or something like that. I've seen people turn it into a screensaver or like their background on their computer so it stays front and center. If you can turn it into just a few words, you can use that as a mantra or a phrase that you use at the beginning of every day or that you post somewhere where you can keep an eye on it. And so the obvious next question, right? If we said, what does wealth mean to you? What's your number one thing that you, if you could only do one thing, what would that be? And then this is the next question. Now, what if you could do one more thing? What would you consider the second most important thing to you? If you could only do two things, what would those two things be? What would the second one be? I'll give folks a second to answer. Good. I'm seeing good answers there. Whoops. Let me go back one. Sorry about that. I got off the questions. And again, there's really no right or wrong answers. This isn't a good or bad. This isn't a value judgment. It's always, what does it mean to you? What's your personal answer or personal definition that we're after here? And when you think about it too, again, if you and somebody else have exactly the same answer, you can probably dig in a little deeper, and odds are good there'll be some differences if you get in there. One technique that I use is using what I call the 5 why. This is the idea of, what does wealth mean to you? And somebody says freedom. Okay, what does freedom mean to you? And they answer. And then what does that mean to you? And they answer. Usually you can go 3 or 4 or 5 levels deep. And by the end of it, you'll end up with a couple of sentences or a paragraph of what does it really mean to you. You may or may not have time to do this on the 30 minutes that we have today, but this is why I would encourage you to jot these questions down or come back to the recording later and spend some more time on it. Now, moving on as well, there's a couple of other resources. So again, I told you earlier, if you go to that inspiredstewardship.com momentum site, and I'll put that link back in the chat again, there's 2 downloadables there. There's a how-to guide to happiness, and then there's the Wheel of Life. I would encourage you to download those. I'll kind of walk you through what they are and what they mean. But again, we're not going to have time to actually fill them out during the session today. So this is kind of your homework. This is something you can do later today or later tonight. The How-To Guide to Happiness actually walks through different components of your life and asks you some questions about those things. The Wheel of Life is a way of looking at all of those components in a more visual way. And you can think about rating where you fall from 0 to 10 on those ideas. And as you do that, if you notice, for instance, that finances for you are maybe a 2 or a 3, and you'd really like them to be a 6 or a 7, then that's an area that you may want to focus on in 2021. You can't focus on every component of your life all at the same time. You can only dig in on a few at a time, because as much as we'd like to be able to do everything, we can't. And so because of that, this is a way of visualizing for you, where's the areas that you want to focus on for this year? What do you want to pay attention to for the next few months? So that maybe you can kind of highlight those areas that are your biggest focus. And those are the areas you want to put a lot of time and energy into working on in 2021. So that's kind of the end of the presentation part. Let me stop the screen share. So I'll open it up to questions. We've got about another 10 or 15 minutes. So it can be any questions about either what I've just presented, or if you have questions about money management or time management, anything around that, I can help with those as well. So if you do have questions, please drop those into the chat. And I'll give folks a second or two. And if not, what I'm going to do is go back to some of your answers, and I'm going to ask you to clarify and expand a little bit more. So, okay. How to change one's mindset around money to have a more effective one? The answer is to actually pay attention to it. The first step, earlier I talked about refocus, gain control, set a plan. One of the problems with money is we have a tendency to try to go to setting a plan and gaining control before we've actually done that refocus stage. And the refocus stage is about mindset and belief. So as an example, this kind of exercise that we did today is a good way of beginning to help bubble out and begin to identify what is your mindset around money. You can also ask questions about kind of how you grew up, your family of origin. There's really a long list of questions that you can ask. And it really comes down to focusing and being intentional about identifying what is your current belief, and then turning that belief by literally writing out or being held accountable to expressing a new belief. So as an example of that, one of the things I challenge my clients to never use the phrase with money, I had to. I had to buy a new car. I had to buy a new jacket. I had to, because the truth is you don't ever have to do anything with money. You choose to. Now, it may be the best choice of a whole bunch of bad choices, but it was still a choice. And so literally the language we use, and this is one of the reasons that working with a coach or working with someone else can be very helpful, is because they can help kind of reset some of those mindset and belief. The Wheel of Life document should be a circle with numbers on it that you can actually fill out visually. If not, then somehow the wrong one got uploaded, and I'll have to fix it for you later after we get off the call. Let's see. Any advice about trying to find your purpose, passion when you're in a situation where you're currently unemployed and having others relying on you? Russ, that's a tough situation to be in. It's always a tough situation to be in, especially when you're unemployed. But one of the things that I encourage people to do in those situations is, number one, remain active. That can literally be exercise, physical activity, going for a walk, those sorts of things, because physical activity helps your brain chemistry. And then the second part of that is begin trying to figure out ways to money. And what I mean by that is maybe it's not finding a job, maybe it is finding a job, but finding ways to begin generating income in some way, shape, or form as quickly as possible. And of course, you got to be careful around, if you're taking unemployment and that kind of thing, making sure you're following all the rules. I'm not suggesting you go and do anything behind anyone's back or anything like that. But it's about beginning to, number one, keep your physical activity up, because that helps keep your emotional energy up. And then number two, beginning to dive into a little bit more about, what are the fastest routes to generating some sort of income? How do we connect wealth with our time and effort? not sure I understand that question yet. So if you could expand on that a little bit, that might help me. There is a PDF. I do have a PDF, Ruby, of this as well. I'll put it up on that website after we get off the call. I'll link to a PDF version. The Word one should open in Pages. I have had clients successfully open it in Pages, but sometimes the formatting can get off. So I'll put a PDF version up for you after we get done with the call today. How do partners and households, if there's different philosophies, relationships to money management? That's a really common situation. Most of the time, if you're married or in a significant relationship with someone, you're not identical in your approach to money and money management. That's one of the things that usually attracts you to each other. One of the things to recognize is that you probably need both halves, meaning if one of you tends to be a little bit more focused on, investing and saving and security, and the other one's a little bit more, free-willing and a little bit more fun and a little more spontaneous, you need a little bit of both of those things in your life. So it's really just about coming together, communicating, and finding the bigger ideas and the bigger goals behind those things. In other words, why is one of you more spontaneous and the other is more interested in safety and security and investing and that kind of thing? What's the reason behind it? And as you can begin to talk through those reasons behind it, a lot of times you can find out that you have more in common than you think. And you can begin to align those things because you almost always have enough money to do anything, but we never have enough money to do everything. And once we recognize that, then it's a matter of doing things like one of the tools that I use with clients is we set a priority list. And it's literally just, we're going to do this first, we're going to do this second, we're going to do this third, and we agree to it. And what's interesting is then when something new comes up, you can kind of slot it in and go, okay, great. Is this more important than number one on our list? And if you both agree that it is, that's your new number one. And believe it or not, it can really cut down on that sort of fighting and arguing and difference of opinion. But it does take time and it does take work. It's not simple, if that makes sense. And yeah, I will put the PDF version up if we get off the call. So those of you that need a PDF, you can get that. NLP can be useful, neuro-linguistic programming. It's one of a whole suite of tools. It's by no means the only one. For some people, it's the best one. For others, it's not. I'm not a real big firm believer in there is one magic tool that works for all people in all situations, but it definitely can be something that I've seen some success with when it comes to changing mindsets and belief. But it's by no means the only way. But it is part of one of the tools that often gets put out there. And then once we know our priorities in terms of time and effort, like you mentioned, how do we transform it? What's the next step? Okay, so if you know your priorities, that's the refocus stage. Once you know them, the second step is gain control. And that means figuring out where are things not in alignment currently with your priorities and your values. In other words, if you literally went down your budget, what are you spending money on that doesn't move you towards those values? If you look at your calendar or you sit down and do what I call a 15-minute miracle, which is literally just dividing a piece of paper into 15 or 30-minute blocks, setting an alarm on your phone or on your watch, and every 15 or 30 minutes writing down, what did I do in that half hour? What did I do in that half hour? This is for time. If you look at how you spend your time in the day and it's not in alignment with getting you towards your priorities and values, you need to change something in your time. So that's that gaining control. You begin to identify, where am I doing things now with my time or my money that aren't in alignment with moving me towards my priorities and values? Then as you identify those, okay, the third step is set a plan. This is where we can bring in other things during gain control and set a plan. We can bring in tools like, as an example, if you spend too much money on groceries and eating out, converting those spending areas to cash envelopes can be helpful. Why? Because there's actually a ton of studies out there that show when we spend cash, we have a tendency to spend less money than when we use a debit or a credit card. So you identify specific areas and you implement tools and techniques to begin to shift your behavior in those areas. And then it's just kind of a feedback loop. Because guess what? When you get those areas under control, suddenly you discover new areas, okay? It's normal, it's natural. That doesn't mean you screwed up or you did anything wrong. It's one of the things we think sometimes is if we can fix this one magic area, everything else will fix. Instead, it's more of a spiral where you kind of climb up this mountain or you're kind of climbing stairs as you go each level. So that as you inject those tools, you circle back and have to refocus again, because all of a sudden your definition of wealth will change. Okay. I trust me, I've seen this thousands of times. I've worked with clients for 6-7 years, and there's always something new that comes up because we're just traveling through life. And so there's always new stuff. There's always new questions, and you kind of circle back to refocus and then gain control and then set a plan again. And then you refocus, gain control, set a plan again. So at that same website that I put up earlier, if you want to if I didn't get to your question or I didn't answer it fully, if you look at the bottom, there's actually you can sign up and get some additional tools on time, on talent, or on treasures as well. So you can get those down there. And then at the bottom of the page, there is actually a place where you can set up a 30-minute call with me. That's free. And we can talk a little bit if this is something that you're interested in learning more or working with a coach on, or if you just have a question that you want a quick answer for, feel free to jump on my calendar with a 30-minute call. And I'd be more than happy to help you with that as well. Thank you. I'm glad that explanation helped, because, it is one of the biggest things we have. A lot of times we think when we fix this one thing, our life is fixed. And as I've gotten older and a little more gray hair, I figured out, yeah, no. Part of being alive is constantly learning and growing. If you're not growing, you're struggling. You're going to end up, the old joke is if you're not growing, you're dying, because the truth is that it is a constant new challenge, new change. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. That's kind of part of what makes life interesting. Huge college loans paid off. The short answer on any large debt is remember that at the end of the day, the only way to pay them off is by paying large amounts of money. And I say that not being flippant and not being, I'm not saying it's not a big deal, but if you have, for instance, I've worked with clients that have $250,000 or more in student loan debt. I think my largest one that a client ever had was $386. In all cases, they were eventually able to pay them. But in those cases, the only way to pay that is to have a fairly large income. And so in one case, they actually started their own business and grew that. In the other case, they were actually, a professional. They were a doctor. And as their income as a doctor came up, what they did is kept their lifestyle very, very low, made large payments, so they paid them off relatively quickly. There are some, student loan relief programs and things that some of which do actually work. I know you always hear the horror stories. Those things never work. There are ones that do. They're never easy, but there are ways you can do that as well. And in some cases that works, but depending on your personal situation, you may or may not qualify for those. But again, that's something that, I've worked with folks before too. Yeah, double up on payments as often as you can. Get everything else in control. Get your income up, and you make progress on it. It just takes time. If it's one of those, if I had a magic wand, I would forgive everybody's students' loans, but I don't have a magic wand. Cheap apartment. Exactly. You're doing the right things, Christina. It just takes time, and it's never easy. It's similar to the earlier question about the unemployment as well. If you're struggling in that kind of situation, like Russ asked about, it's never easy. It's never quick. However, it is worth it, and you can do it. I've worked with clients through unemployment, that kind of stuff happens. So what's more important than what happens to you is that you turn it around and you happen to it. In other words, it's not about being unemployed. It's about what you do in response to that. It's not about your student loan. It's about what you do in response to that desire of paying it off. That's what's important. The action that you take, the mindset that you have, what's in your heart and your behavior. That's what really will fix it long term. Never easy, never quick, not making light of it, but it really is the reactions that we have. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. I'll get the PDF up in probably about 20 minutes. So just save that link and you can go back and check it, and I'll have that up for you as well. If those of you that want to do that. And it is mentally healthy to get control of how you spend your money. Absolutely. I agree. And again, I'd look forward to chatting with anyone if you would like to jump on one of those 30-minute calls, or if you want some more tools and resources, you can get access to those on that same website if you just scroll down a little bit. Thank y'all for coming. I appreciate it.